The Young and the Restless Spoilers. Kyle had always been a man who loved deeply, perhaps too deeply for his own good. The kind of man who did not fall in love often, but when he did, he poured every piece of his heart into that person until there was nothing left of himself. With Claire, that devotion had been absolute. Every breath, every heartbeat had revolved around her. He believed that love could redeem even the darkest corners of his life. But now, standing in the dim light of her apartment, watching her body entangled with Holden's, all that love collapsed like a structure built on sand. The soundless shattering of his heart echoed in the hollow space between them, leaving only the stinging truth that the woman he once called his forever had found comfort in another man's arms. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The air turned poisonous, thick with betrayal and disbelief. He wanted to scream, but the pain was too vast to be voiced. Claire's laughter, low and satisfied, sliced through him like a blade. When she turned to look at him, there was no guilt in her eyes, only defiance, a cruel satisfaction that she had managed to wound him in the deepest possible way. And when she whispered that they were done, that it was time for him to move on, something inside Kyle fractured beyond repair. He stumbled into the street afterward, his thoughts spinning in chaos. The rain fell hard, soaking his clothes, but he didn't care. The city lights blurred into streaks of color as he walked aimlessly, trying to find reason in a world that had stopped making sense. Love and hate began to merge within him until they became indistinguishable, feeding off each other in a twisted harmony. He tried to remind himself that he had been the one who stayed faithful, that he had believed in her goodness, that he had imagined a life built on trust. But the more he thought about it, the more that trust turned to dust, the more her betrayal burned through his veins like fire. The image of her with Holden replayed over and over, haunting him in flashes, her hands, her voice, her smile. Each recollection fueled something darker within him, something primal and vindictive. He felt humiliated, not just as a man but as someone who had believed too much in the purity of love. Days passed, but Kyle could not let go. Sleep abandoned him. His nights were filled with visions of Claire and Holden. He imagined them whispering secrets, making plans, sharing moments that once belonged to him. Every reminder of her was torture, every photo, every scent, every memory. His love had curdled into something poisonous, and though he tried to fight it, the bitterness consumed him. Then came the announcement that shattered the last fragment of his restraint: Claire was pregnant. The news spread like wildfire through their circle, and when Kyle heard it, he froze. Pregnant. The word echoed in his skull until it became unbearable. The child, he thought, was proof that she had moved on completely, that Holden had succeeded in taking everything from him. He saw her once again in his mind, standing with her hand over her stomach, smiling. That smile ignited the fury that had been dormant, a silent explosion that sent cracks through his sanity. He went to see her, telling himself that he only wanted closure. But the moment he saw her belly, that small swell of new life, something unholy took over him. His eyes locked onto it, unblinking, the way a predator watches prey. It was irrational and cruel, but he couldn't help it. He hated that child. He hated what it represented, a bond between Claire and Holden that he could never destroy. In that instant, the world narrowed to a single, unbearable thought: if that connection were gone, she would suffer as he had suffered. That thought terrified him because it felt like it didn't belong to him, as though it had come from some darker force whispering from within. But he couldn't silence it. It followed him home, lingered in his dreams, and stalked him in daylight. The image of Claire losing the baby crept into his imagination, and he hated himself for not pushing it away. Yet he kept seeing it, her tears, her pain, her loss, until even that vision became a form of comfort. He started following her without realizing when the obsession began. At first, it was curiosity, then it became ritual. He watched her from across the street as she met Holden, saw the way he touched her protectively, and felt sickened by the tenderness between them. Every time she smiled, his hatred deepened. He knew it was wrong, knew it was madness, but emotion had long replaced reason. He began keeping a small notebook, scribbling fragmented thoughts, plans that made no sense to anyone but him. He wrote about fairness, about balance, about how love had turned into punishment. Each page was more disturbing than the last, and yet writing gave him a twisted sense of order. The anger made him feel alive again. Claire, oblivious to his unraveling, continued her life with Holden, unaware of the storm brewing around her. But fate, it seemed, had already chosen its sides. When she announced her pregnancy publicly, Kyle's spiral reached its peak. He stood in front of a mirror that night, staring at his reflection, barely recognizing the man looking back. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling, his thoughts fragmented. She deserves to feel it, he whispered to himself, his mind splitting between guilt and vengeance. That was when he crossed an invisible line, deciding that he would no longer be the one who suffered in silence. He began to plan. It wasn't rational, it wasn't even coherent. It was rage dressed as justice. He told himself that he wasn't going to hurt her, he only wanted her to understand, to fear, to lose something precious as he had lost her. But deep down, a darker intention pulsed beneath the surface. He imagined scenarios, each more violent than the last. The fantasy of Claire falling, of her crying out, of her losing the child haunted him until it no longer shocked him. The thought no longer made him sick, it comforted him. He began visiting her neighborhood, waiting near places she frequented, blending into the background like a ghost. Sometimes, he would see her laugh, or touch her belly lovingly, and the sight would send him into a rage so consuming he could barely control it. But guilt, too, was a companion. There were moments when he would break down, sobbing, begging himself to stop thinking that way. He would remember the times they shared, the love they once knew, and for a brief second, he would feel human again. But then her betrayal returned to him like a wound reopening, raw and infected, and the guilt would dissolve into fury. He was trapped in an endless loop of love and hate, unable to escape either. His mind started to fracture under the weight of it. Friends noticed he had changed, his once gentle demeanor replaced by paranoia, his warmth replaced by a cold detachment. But Kyle had stopped caring what others thought. The world outside his pain no longer existed. As weeks turned to months, Claire's pregnancy progressed, and Kyle's madness deepened. Every day he thought about how easy it would be to make one accident happen, just one misstep, one small push, and everything would be undone. He imagined her face when she realized it was gone, imagined her calling for help, imagined her blaming Holden. The idea consumed him. It was no longer about revenge, it had become a ritual in his mind, a dark prayer for release. And yet, beneath all that hatred, somewhere deep inside, a part of him still loved her. That was the cruelest truth of all. His heart, even in its ruin, still beat for the woman who had destroyed him. Then one night, he dreamed of her again, not as she was now, but as she had been before everything fell apart. In his dream, she was smiling, the light in her eyes pure and kind, and she reached out her hand to him. When he woke up, he was trembling, tears staining his face. For the first time in months, he felt remorse so heavy that it suffocated him. The realization hit him that his obsession was turning him into something monstrous, something Claire would never recognize. But even as he tried to pull back, the damage was already done. His thoughts had gone too far, his heart too poisoned to cleanse. He could no longer distinguish between love and hate, justice and cruelty, redemption and damnation. Kyle stood outside her home one last time, hidden in the shadows, watching the lights flicker inside. He saw her silhouette move past the window, her hands resting protectively on her belly. In that moment, everything collided within him, the memories of love, the agony of betrayal, the guilt, the rage, the yearning for what could never be repaired. He realized he had become a stranger to himself, a man standing on the edge of something irreversible. And yet he could not move, could not turn away. The night was silent, except for the sound of his heartbeat echoing in his ears. His eyes burned, his breath came in shallow bursts, and his hands clenched into fists. The thought crossed his mind again, dark, insidious, final. But this time, he did not act. He only stood there, trembling, haunted by the image of what he had almost become. He walked away before dawn, the city still sleeping, his heart heavy with the weight of what he could not undo. Perhaps that was his punishment, not prison, not death, but the knowledge that he had loved so completely it had driven him to the brink of evil. And somewhere in the darkness, as he disappeared into the fog, the question lingered like a curse he would carry forever: when love turns into hatred, can a soul ever be saved again, or does it become something that even love itself cannot recognize? Kyle's torment did not end with jealousy, it only evolved into obsession and retribution. When the rumors began to spread that Claire had always shared a secret past with Holden, something inside Kyle shifted from despair to cold calculation. The story gnawed at him, that perhaps everything he'd lived and lost for had been a performance, a cruel and deliberate deception. It wasn't enough that she had betrayed him. Now he suspected she had manipulated him from the start, using love as a mask while her true loyalty lay elsewhere. That realization, if it could even be called one, changed the texture of his pain. It was no longer the chaos of heartbreak, it was purpose, a distorted mission that made him feel alive again. He told himself he only wanted the truth, but the truth he sought was already poisoned by the vengeance growing in his heart. Victoria's voice echoed in his mind like a conscience he didn't want to hear. She would never forgive him if he went too far, never condone the darkness creeping into his soul. She had always believed that love, no matter how painful, must never be twisted into cruelty. Let her go, he could almost hear her saying, because her choices are hers to make. But Kyle was beyond the reach of moral boundaries now. He told himself he wasn't trying to control Claire, he was trying to reclaim the part of himself she had stolen. Still, Victoria's imagined judgment haunted him. He could see the look of disgust on her face if she ever learned what he had thought about doing, how close he had come to acting on his worst impulses. And that shame made him even more desperate to find something, anything, that would justify his anger. He began digging into Claire's past. It started with late-night searches, old social media traces, mutual friends, and travel records. The deeper he went, the stranger things became. There were moments that didn't add up. Places she had claimed to be, people she had pretended not to know. Holden appeared in photos long before she ever admitted meeting him. The evidence was circumstantial but enough to feed Kyle's paranoia. The idea took root: Holden and Claire had orchestrated everything, that their chance meeting had been planned, that her love for him had been nothing more than an act in a larger game. Maybe it was about money, revenge, or simply thrill. The details didn't matter. What mattered was the narrative Kyle was building, a story in which he was the victim, deceived and discarded by those he trusted most. It gave him structure, a way to rationalize the pain he could no longer bear. Yet behind the anger, regret festered like an open wound. Summer's face would flash before him, the woman he had walked away from without explanation, believing that what he shared with Claire was more real, more electric, more fated. And then there was Harrison, the little boy who had once clung to him with unconditional love. He had promised to be a father worth admiring, but he had failed them both. He had chosen the illusion of passion over the truth of loyalty, and now he stood in the ruins of both. The memory of Harrison's laughter was the most unbearable of all, because it reminded him of the man he used to be before Claire entered his world like a storm and tore everything apart. His heart broke not only for what he had lost, but for the man he could no longer recognize. He began to see his reflection differently. The face staring back from the mirror was drawn, hollow, almost haunted. The eyes that once held warmth were now cold and uncertain. He told himself he needed answers from Claire, that once he exposed her lies, he could finally be free. But part of him knew the truth: what he really wanted was to see her suffer, to feel the same devastation that had consumed him. That desire shamed him, yet it was also intoxicating. It gave him focus where once there had been chaos. Every secret he uncovered, every inconsistency he found, became fuel. He told himself it was justice, but even he could hear the hollow echo in that word. Victoria's disapproval hovered over him like a curse. She had been the only one who ever truly understood the depth of his emotions, the raw sincerity behind them. To her, love was something sacred, not to be weaponized or corrupted by bitterness. But Kyle couldn't embrace that purity anymore. It was too painful, too distant. He wondered if Victoria had ever truly understood what it was like to be betrayed so completely. He wanted to believe that if she had seen what he saw, Claire's duplicity, Holden's smugness, she might have felt the same rage burning in him. Yet deep down, he knew she wouldn't. She would have walked away with dignity, not descended into this pit of obsession. The thought filled him with both resentment and longing. As he pieced together the fragments of Claire's past, his mind began to blur the line between truth and suspicion. Perhaps Holden and Claire really had history, perhaps they didn't. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that he believed they did. It justified everything he felt, everything he planned to do. He watched from afar as they appeared in public, their smiles easy, their hands intertwined. The world seemed to applaud them, ignorant of the wreckage they had left behind. Each time he saw her touch her stomach, Kyle felt the old fury return. That child, that future, represented the final theft, the proof that she had moved on, that he was irrelevant. He wanted to believe he hated her, but every time he closed his eyes, it wasn't hatred that filled him. It was yearning, twisted and desperate, for the moments when she had looked at him the way she now looked at Holden. His regrets multiplied. Leaving Summer had been the first wound, betraying his son's trust the second, and letting vengeance define him the third. Each regret built upon the last, turning his soul into a labyrinth of contradictions. He missed the man who could have forgiven, who could have walked away. But that man was gone, buried under layers of anger and shame. Sometimes he imagined confronting Claire, not to hurt her but to demand the truth, to make her admit everything she had done. Yet he feared that if she looked at him with those same calm, pitying eyes, it would destroy what little sanity he had left. He wanted her to fear him, but he also wanted her to remember that he had once loved her more than anyone ever could. In the rare quiet moments, Kyle would replay his choices in his mind like a film he couldn't stop watching. He saw himself turning away from Summer's tearful face, heard the door closing behind him, felt Harrison's small hands clutching his arm one last time before slipping away. Those memories haunted him more than any of Claire's betrayals, because they revealed the truth he refused to face: he wasn't just the victim. He had been the architect of his own downfall. He had chosen Claire over everything that was pure in his life, and now he was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own heart. And still, despite everything, a part of him clung to hope, a delusional fragment of belief that maybe if he could understand the full story, if he could uncover the real reason behind Claire's actions, redemption might still be possible. Perhaps he could forgive her. Perhaps he could forgive himself. But the path to redemption is never clear for those who have already embraced darkness. He had crossed too many lines, thought too many unforgivable thoughts. He stood now on the edge of his own morality, teetering between damnation and awakening. If Victoria knew the depth of his obsession, she would recoil. She would tell him that no love is worth losing one's soul. And she would be right. But Kyle had learned too late that love, once corrupted, becomes its own kind of prison, a place where guilt and longing live side by side. He might uncover every secret of Claire's past, expose every deception she and Holden ever committed, and still find no peace. Because the real punishment, the one he could never escape, was the knowledge that his greatest enemy was not Claire, or Holden, or even betrayal itself. It was the reflection staring back at him, the man who had loved too much, trusted too deeply, and in losing everything, had become something unrecognizable.